When a routine voyage turned deadly, hundreds of souls aboard fought to stay alive, and yet only a handful would survive. What unfolded on the Colima that led to one of the Pacific's most tragic shipwrecks? Journey with us as we uncover a heart-stopping story of a voyage that led only to a mass grave or a tomb at the bottom of the sea. Welcome aboard as we walk the decks of another ill-fated ship, lost before her time. 173 lives were snuffed out on what was supposed to be a pleasurable voyage for the Colima to the warm climes of Central America. How could this calamity have happened? Due to the poor communication during that era in history, there are competing theories about exactly what happened. We combine the different accounts using speculative reasoning to create a logical scenario. Our look into this tragedy begins with a low chant filling a quiet hillside as a priest murmurs a solemn prayer over a mass grave near Manzanillo, Mexico. As the appointed priest in Manzanillo, the padre had long been a shepherd to the community, presiding over countless burials for those claimed by the afterlife. These strangers now rested under his care as the townspeople felt a solemn duty to honor the dead. The mass grave had become a quiet testament to the lives lost, and the father's voice held a sorrow for those lost in the depths. He prayed not just for their souls, but for the healing of those left behind. 54 bodies, recovered from the ocean in the aftermath of a horrific disaster, lay shrouded in white sheets, their faces forever hidden from the world. The priest spoke in a soft yet resolute voice, his words echoing through the salty coastal air as he prayed in Spanish, a prayer for peace in a place where it had been so cruelly torn away. He shifted to English, his voice faltering. Almighty God, we commend these souls to your infinite mercy. Grant them eternal rest, Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon them. The local peasants stood by with shovels in hand, waiting to cover the bodies. Some crossed themselves, others simply watched in silence, heads bowed. As the priest finished, he turned his gaze to the ocean, unable to hide the grief and confusion darkening his expression. "Dear Lord," he whispered, "how could this have happened to these poor souls?" From among the gathered mourners, a man with a fresh bandage across his brow stepped forward, his eyes hollow and distant, bearing the look of someone who had seen horrors that would haunt him for life. He cleared his throat, his voice thick with sorrow. "I'll tell you how it happened. I was there." The Pacific mail steamer Colima had sailed out of San Francisco on May 18, 1895, bound for Panama. She was a sturdy vessel built in Chester, Pennsylvania, by John Roach and Sons in 1873. At nearly 2,909 tons gross weight, she was no small craft, with an engine that generated 1,100 horsepower, capable of driving her at 11.5 knots. She had an iron hull and was a single-screw propeller, a design meant for durability in rough waters. Captain D.E. Griffith commanded her, a veteran of the sea. On this voyage, the ship was well laden with over 2,000 tons of general cargo, including a deck loaded with lumber valued at $103,000. The weight of the cargo would later be speculated as having made her top-heavy, a dangerous flaw for any ship, especially in rough seas. She carried nearly 200 souls, 39 cabin passengers, 80 steerage passengers, and a crew of 61. It was an ordinary voyage, one the Colima had completed countless times before. But the hand of fate, it would turn out, had made other plans. Enter our historical composites for our unfolding tale of tragedy. The family we have envisioned and shall now meet are typical of the travellers that might be found aboard steamships in the dwindling years of the 19th century. Diplomat Mason Evans was travelling with his wife, Anne, and their young daughter, Sophia, whom they cheerfully liked to call Jellybean. on his way to a career-advancing diplomatic posting in Panama. The journey southward had been uneventful until they reached Manzanillo. The town lay nestled on the coast of Mexico, the last stop before the Colima would continue her voyage into the open ocean. Mason had leaned over the railing as the steamer departed, pointing out the city's fading lights to Sophia, who clung to his side, her small fingers curled around his thumb. But 2 hours out from Manzanillo, a storm came. A fierce wind tore across the sea, and dark clouds gathered with a foreboding that Mason felt deep in his chest. The waves grew vicious, rising and crashing over the deck as the Colima fought against the elements. Crew members scrambled, shouting commands, faces set with grim resolve. As the hours passed, the winds howled louder, pressing the ship into a precarious list. Below deck, the shifting cargo strained against its ties. Lumber and crates shifted, unbalancing the vessel further. Mason clung to Anne and Sophia, his heart racing with a fear he had not known before. The Colima was lurching with a force that made even standing difficult. When a series of shouts so loud they could be heard over the wind echoed from above deck, Mason hesitated, glancing at his wife, who nodded, fear in her eyes. He needed to understand what was happening and, more urgently, how bad things had become. He gave Sophia's shoulder a final reassuring touch before bracing himself and making his way to the deck, steadying himself against the walls as the ship tilted sharply. Once he emerged, the full force of the gale hit him. The winds fierce, the rain cutting like knives. The ship shuddered violently, and then it happened. Below the surface, the Colima rammed into a coral reef, stoving a hole so large that it became the first nail in the coffin for the Panama-bound steamer. Above Mason's head was a deafening crack, a splintering sound that echoed above the tempest's roar. Mason looked up in time to see one of the masts snap, a massive beam collapsing in a deadly arc. It fell with brutal force, striking Captain Griffith and 2 crewmen who had been struggling to secure the rigging, killing them instantly. Mortally wounded, the top-heavy ship began an immediate list, but that was only the beginning of the nightmare ahead. A torrent surged below deck, cascading down into the heart of the ship, the engine room. There men worked frantically, sweat mingling with salty brine as they desperately tried keeping the boilers stable. But the cold seawater flooded in too quickly, hissing and evaporating against the scorching metal. The chief engineer shouted above the chaos, his voice cracking with urgency as he ordered his men to abandon their posts, realizing the ship was lost. Panic flashed in the eyes of the crew as they scrambled to escape, knowing only too well what was coming. The sudden contact of cold water with the red-hot boiler sent shockwaves through the metal. With a thunderous roar, the boiler ruptured. The explosion tore through the engine room like a thing alive, claiming all within the vicinity as fragments of iron filled the room, and in an instant, the compartment became a scene of horror. Dark and chaotic, filled with screams that were quickly silenced. Above deck, passengers and crew alike felt the force of the blast. That was the final nail. The Colima's fate had been sealed. Pandemonium spread like wildfire among the passengers as they realized they were now thrust into a life-or-death scenario. The ship was listing badly as the 3rd officer took command, frantically trying to organize the evacuation. Having retrieved his family, Mason held them close as the call went out to board the lifeboats. "Anne," he whispered urgently, "we'll get through this, I promise." His wife nodded, her face drawn but resolute, clutching Sophia close. "We just need to stay together," Anne replied, trembling. Clinging to her mother's side, Sophia looked up at Mason with wide eyes. "Daddy." "I'm scared." Mason knelt, his hand on her shoulder. "I know Jellybean's sweetheart," he said, swallowing back his own fear. "But everything will be just fine. I promise." Suddenly, they were separated as a swarm of passengers rushed towards the boat for which they were heading. Mason was knocked to the ground. In the frenzy of the evacuation, officers and crew shouted orders, their voices barely piercing the cacophony of panicked cries. Passengers jostled and shoved, each trying to push their way to safety as the lifeboats were filling, creating a volatile mix of desperation and confusion. The deck tilted beneath their feet, adding to the chaos as people stumbled and clung to anything sturdy. The few crew members still attempting to keep order fought against the overwhelming terror sweeping through the crowd, their efforts a fragile thread holding back the hysteria. By the time Mason managed to regain his footing amid this melee, he saw that the crew had just finished pushing Anne and Sophia into the lifeboat. The diplomat strained against the throng, trying to rejoin his family, but each step seemed to draw them further apart. Mason struggled, trying to follow, but the crowd surged again, cutting him off, but he fought like a wildcat until he gained the rail just as the boat was touching the water. He shouted frantically to be heard above the bedlam. "Anne! Jelly bean!" he called, his heart pounding as he saw their boat heaving in the waters, passengers and crew clumsily fumbling with the oars. "Just stay calm. I'll find you. I'll be right behind you. Just hold on tight." Anne looked up, reaching for him, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Mason, hurry!" But he could do nothing but watch helplessly as the lifeboat that carried his wife and daughter spun about in the water, no one able to work the oars properly. Tearing himself away, Mason searched for another boat as cries of terror rose in the night. Mason became aware of an arm on his shoulder, guiding him toward another lifeboat. It was a young sailor, Jones or James or something like that, with whom he had shared a smoke during one of their stops along the Mexican coast. "Come on, sir, we'll get you off." Reaching the boat, he climbed in, gripping the side as it began to lower, his eyes never leaving the small craft that held his family still bobbing further up along the side of the canting ship. His lifeboat was nearly free of the boat when Jones shouted, "She's going down!" Then he saw it, Anne and Sophia's boat, caught in the Colima's deadly pull, dragged back toward the sinking ship. "No!" he shouted, the word tearing from his throat as he watched their boat lurch and tilt dangerously. "Anne! Jelly bean!" His voice cracked, filled with helpless terror. His wife looked back, her face pale in the darkness, one arm wrapped tightly around Sophia. "Mason!" she shouted, struggling to be heard over the din. "Mason, help us!" Terror froze his veins solid as he saw their lifeboat swallowed by the water, pulled under by the Colima's powerful, slow descent that created a deadly suction. The sight of his family vanishing beneath the waves snapped something inside him. Without thinking, Mason rose to leap from the boat. Jones tried to grab him, but he shook the young man off. Toppling backward, the young sailor landed on several people, his head striking the gunwale of the boat amid terrified cries and angry shouts. With no one to stop him, Mason plunged into the ocean. "Hold on! I'm coming!" he screamed, the words nearly lost in the howling wind as he fought against the powerful currents. He kicked furiously, his arms cutting through the waves as he swam toward the spot where their boat had vanished. Salt water stung his eyes and blurred his vision, but he pushed forward, his breath coming in ragged gasps, stolen by the relentless sea. "Anne! Sophia!" he shouted again, his voice raw, each call more desperate than the last. Diving beneath the surface, he clawed through the darkness, his hands reaching, hoping to feel their touch, his very soul consumed with dread and determination. But the ocean was as merciless as it was dark, and the silence beneath the waves swallowed his pleas as he searched blindly, praying for a miracle that refused to come. He had gone too far now. There was no going back. His final thoughts were of Anne and his jellybean and a prayer that he might find them in the next world. Back on what little of the Colima remained on the surface, the crew struggled to launch the last few boats as the ship slipped further into the water, but it was too late. Waves swamped the final lifeboats, and the Colima, with its cargo of souls, sank beneath the waves, leaving nothing but wreckage scattered across the ocean's surface. After the tragedy, news of the Colima's sinking at Manzanillo, Mexico, was scarce and unsatisfactory in California. Pacific Mail officials in San Francisco insisted they had no details on the wreck and attempted to dismiss reports of the disaster entirely. However, multiple dispatches reached the Merchants Exchange and private shipping companies, each confirming the grim story, though the specifics varied. Captain Pitts of the San Juan sent a telegram reporting that he had found a lifeboat with 19 survivors, 14 passengers and 5 crew members from the Colima. Those rescued were taken to Manzanillo, and the San Juan resumed its search for additional lifeboats, operating under the assumption that more passengers and crew might be adrift. But no other castaways were found, and soon bodies began to wash ashore along the Mexican coast. The survivor, Deck Hand Jones, took a shaky breath, his voice low and hoarse, his mind retreating from the haunting memory of those last desperate moments on the Colima. There were nearly 200 of us on that ship, and only 19 lived to tell the tale. The sea. The sea takes what it wants. I just wish I could have stopped, Mr. Mason. The priest nodded, his gaze somber as he signalled for the grave to be filled. You did what you could, son. It is a tragedy beyond words. At least he is with his family. The other families who lost their loved ones, God grant them that they someday know peace. Jones touched the bandage on his head, his eyes fixed on the grave as the first shovelfuls of earth fell, covering the white shrouds. I've seen death before, Father, but never like this. It wasn't the sea alone that killed them. It was the weight of greed. The cargo stacked high, the decks laden with lumber, overloading a ship never meant to carry so much. Maybe if she hadn't listed so quickly, more of the boats could have gotten clear before she sank. The Colima was a ship destined for disaster. Jones went quiet and then lit a cigarette, shaking the match out. Standing over the grave, Jones felt the weight of responsibility settle upon him. I still feel like I owe it to him, he muttered. If I couldn't stop him, I can at least bear witness, to remember what he did for his family. They deserved as much. I really felt as if I should be here for the Masons and the others before I go home, because I get to go home. The priest whispered a final prayer accompanied by spades of dirt, continuing to rain down on the bodies now claimed by the earth after being surrendered by the sea. Soon the sun dipped below the horizon, and the small clutch of mourners turned back toward Manzanillo, having assembled to honor the souls of people, save for Jones, they had never met. Today the Colima rests somewhere far beneath the waves off the coast of Manzanillo, her iron hull hidden deep in the dark, a silent tomb for those she carried. Was it the storm, the top heaviness, a coral reef, or the boiler explosion that ultimately placed her in the depths? Perhaps we shall never know for sure. There is no question, however, that the Colima tragedy is one of an unforgiving sea once more claiming dreams and futures, leaving only the pain of what might have been. The lost Colima, a vessel meant to carry lives to new beginnings and happy times, instead carried her ill-fated passengers to an end as final as the depths that now hold her. As we come to the end of this tragedy, we remember them, not as statistics in a long list of those who met their ends travelling the waves, but as lives who mattered, as hearts that loved and were loved. For all those lost on that fateful night, they now share the same haunting and eternal epitaph. The sea is my grave is the sea. Thank you for joining us. It's time to set sail now. But if you would enjoy more dramatized retellings, please be sure to hit the like button, comment, share, and subscribe so that we may bring you more harrowing tales of the sea. And be sure to check out more of our shipwrecks and other maritime content on this channel.